Okay, let's unpack this because, let's be honest, when I first heard whispers of this idea light, the seemingly weightless, timeless stuff being the hidden architect of memory, of the very patterns that make us, my immediate reaction was, yeah, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How can something so ethereal be responsible for something so fundamentally real? If that's where your head is at right now, that feeling of WTF help, you are absolutely in the right place.
Absolutely. And that skepticism, that initial bullshit radar going off, that's actually precisely the right starting point.
Good, because it feels counterintuitive.
It does. The notion that something so apparently intangible could be so foundational to life as we know it, well, it demands serious scrutiny. So if you're thinking, prove it, or how on earth could that work, then our mission today is to address those very questions head on.
Exactly. Our mission in this deep dive is to dismantle that initial disbelief piece by piece. We're not just going to throw out wild theories. We're going to explore the evidence, trace the logical connections, and by the end, hopefully, we'll have moved from, yeah, right, to a much more intriguing, okay, maybe there's something to this.
And the material we're drawing on today is all about getting to the heart of that how.
Yeah.
We have detailed explanations, looking at the fundamental interactions of light and matter.
Right.
And we'll be exploring how these interactions leave lasting traces that shape everything from our cells to our memories. We'll also touch on how this understanding isn't just theoretical, but has real, testable implications for things like healing and regeneration. So let's really dig in.
All right, so let's start by reframing our understanding of light. Forget about just the brightness of a light bulb for a second.
Yeah, that's key. What's fascinating to consider is light as a fundamental oscillation, a vibration in the electromagnetic field.
An oscillation, like a wave.
Exactly. Different frequencies of light carry distinct vibrational signatures, and these aren't just abstract properties. These vibrations engage with the world around us in very tangible ways. Think of it like different musical notes causing different objects to resonate.
Okay, so it's not just about illuminating a room, it's about these vibrations interacting with stuff. How does that interaction actually translate to something meaningful, like, say, information?
Well, consider how these light oscillations encounter the fundamental building blocks of everything: atoms, molecules, electrons. When light strikes matter, it imparts energy, causing electrons to shift and move.
Okay.
This movement, this subtle alteration at the most basic level, is akin to light writing on matter. It's not storing data in a digital file, obviously, but rather inducing physical changes in the structure itself.
Like leaving a little mark?
Precisely. Imagine sunlight nudging the molecules in a plant, guiding its growth, its information transfer at a fundamental level. The light changes the plant's structure over time.
So light hits something and jiggles the tiny bits. How does that microscopic jiggle contribute to something macroscopic, like remembering a phone number or even just form?
That's the crucial question of scale, isn't it?
Yeah.
Picture a wave of light interacting with a structure, maybe a protein folding into a specific shape, or a molecule changing its electrical charge, even a boundary within a cellular field shifting slightly.
Tiny changes.
Very tiny. But these interactions cause minute changes in geometry or electrical potential. Think of it like wind shaping sand dunes. Over time, each gust makes a small change, but collectively they form a distinct pattern.
Okay, I can picture that.
Similarly, these light interactions accumulate, creating patterns in our bodies and brains. The intricate connections between neurons, the specific arrangement of molecules, and these patterns in essence are memory. They hold the information.
So it's like a cumulative effect of these tiny light interactions leaving their mark, a history.
Precisely. Over time, these repeated interactions etch patterns into our physical being. It's like repeatedly walking the same path in tall grass. Eventually, a clear trail emerges. These light-driven interactions do the same, creating physical pathways and structures that encode our experiences.
Now, photons themselves are often described as timeless. They don't experience time passing, right? If they don't age, how can their interactions lead to something as time-dependent as a memory?
That's a great point, and it seems like a paradox. What's compelling here is the interface between the photon's existence and the realm of matter. While a photon might not age in transit, the instant it interacts with matter, it creates a snapshot, a lasting trace of that interaction in matter, which exists in time.
Ah, so the interaction itself is the time-bound event.
Exactly. So whether it's a photon altering a DNA molecule, triggering an ion channel in a nerve cell, or resonating with a protein, it leaves an imprint. That instantaneous event, that change in the physical state of matter, is the very genesis of form, function, and ultimately memory within a system that does experience time.
Okay, so these traces accumulate, forming patterns. But how does life actively utilize these light-written states? It feels like we're just being passively bombarded by light.
Well, that's where evolution comes in. Think about evolution as a process of ingenious adaptation. Life hasn't just been passively exposed to light, it has evolved intricate mechanisms to harness these fundamental interactions.
Like photosynthesis, obviously.
That's a prime example. But also consider UV light and DNA. It's not just a destructive force. The absorption of UV light by DNA can lead to mutations, introducing variations in the genetic code, a foundational way in which light writes new possibilities for life.
Huh. Never thought of mutation that way.
Then you have photoreceptor cells in our eyes, and in simpler organisms, specialized structures designed to capture light and convert it into biological signals, guiding behavior and internal processes. And on a larger scale, the development of bioelectric maps, these patterns of ion flow across tissues, are themselves shaped by these initial light-encoded pathways, guiding growth and form. These early biological systems are essentially a combination of physical structure, dynamic fields, and the accumulated history of light interactions, all working together to create pattern and function.
Bioelectric maps. Michael Levin's work comes to mind immediately there. Can you elaborate on how these electrical patterns relate to this idea of light and memory?
Absolutely. Inside your body, this interplay is constantly at work. Your nervous system, for example, relies on neurons firing using electrochemical gradients, the distribution of charged ions.
The basis of nerve signals.
Exactly. And these gradients are themselves influenced by light interacting with mitochondria, the powerhouses of your cells, and the overall bioelectric fields within your tissues. Even the intricate folding of proteins into their functional three-dimensional shapes is influenced by their history of interaction with photons during their synthesis.
Wow, so it goes really deep.
It does. So your thoughts, your perceptions aren't simply static data stored somewhere. They emerge from this dynamic, interconnected field, a constant resonance within a structural web that has been fundamentally shaped by light.
So memory isn't like a computer file that's just saved in my brain, not a little MP3 of my grandmother's voice.
Yeah, no, not quite like that.
Mm.
Memory is more akin to a standing wave, a continuous interplay of light at the foundational level, the dynamic bioelectric field that permeates your body, the physical structures of your brain, and their ongoing functional activity.
A standing wave.
Think of light as the initial artist, maybe the sculptor's first touch, and your body's molecules and cells as the clay or the canvas. Light begins the process of creation, but the ongoing field of your body and mind becomes the repository, the living record of these light-initiated changes.
Okay, this is starting to click. But I still have some fundamental, how does this actually work questions. Like, how specifically does light alter these structures? How does it lead to habits and memories in a complex system like the human brain? And how does the system have an inherent knowledge of its past interactions? That still feels a bit fuzzy.
Those are the critical points, aren't they? Where we move from concept to mechanism. When we talk about light-altering structure, remember that light is electromagnetic energy. When it interacts with matter, it can excite electrons to higher energy levels. These are quantum leaps.
Okay.
It can induce vibrations in molecules, like shaking a tuning fork. It can even provide the energy needed to break or form chemical bonds. And crucially in biology, it can influence the movement of charged ions across cell membranes, which, as we'll discuss, are fundamental to bioelectric fields.
So even within the incredibly complex environment of my brain, this is happening.
Yes, even there. There's evidence suggesting that there are biophotons, tiny emissions of light from within our own cells, possibly even from the energy-producing mitochondria.
Our cells make their own light.
It seems so. Very faint, but measurable. And these internal photons can trigger subtle changes in the configuration or charge of neurons, particularly within key structural components, like microtubules or cell membranes. These minute physical alterations are then stored not as a single memory unit, but as changes in the overall geometry, the angles, the shapes, the electrical charge distributions of molecules and cellular components, and in the electrical readiness of cells to fire, their field potential.
And this cascade of tiny changes at a cellular level is how a memory or a habit takes root in the brain, like learning to ride a bike.
Exactly. Memory isn't a singular entity tucked away in one spot. It's a stable pattern of interconnected activity that develops across networks of neurons over time and space. Think about repetition. When a light-induced change or a flow of ions repeatedly affects a particular set of connections, those connections strengthen.
The neurons that fire together, wire together idea.
That's the essence of Hebbian plasticity. It's like repeatedly folding a piece of paper along the same crease. Eventually, it folds much more easily along that line. A pathway is formed.
So the memory isn't held by one specific neuron, but in the strengthened links between them, the pattern of connection.
Precisely. The memory resides in the network of relationships between cells. This creates a dynamic, ever-adjusting field of connections, a bioelectric pattern that your brain constantly refines based on your past experiences, what has been successful, what hasn't.
Okay, but how does the system retain a memory of these past interactions? It's not like my cells are keeping a logbook, right? How does it know its history?
You've hit on a key insight. The system doesn't remember in the way a conscious mind recalls an event. Instead, the history of interaction is physically embedded within the structure itself.
Embedded.
Yeah. Go back to our analogy of the tuning fork or maybe a bell. The way it vibrates, its specific pitch and resonance, remembers its physical shape and the material it's made from. Similarly, the neural pathways in your brain fire in patterns that reflect their prior use and strengthening. The more a particular pattern of oscillation occurs within the bioelectric field, the more stable and readily accessible that pattern becomes. That's what we mean by coherence.
So coherence is stability of the pattern.
In essence, yes. So memory, in this context, is the combination of resonant physical geometry, the ongoing interactions within the bioelectric field, and the stored electrical charge potential of the cells involved. History is physically unfolded.
And this bioelectric field, you keep saying it's real. For someone still a bit skeptical, thinking, okay, fields, that sounds a bit woo-woo. What's the concrete evidence? Is this measurable stuff?
Oh, absolutely. That skepticism is valid, and it's important to understand that bioelectric fields are not some vague New Age concept. They are a well-established aspect of biology, directly measurable, using sensitive instruments like vibrating probes or voltage-sensitive dyes.
Like Levin's work again.
Exactly. Pioneers like Michael Levin have dedicated their careers to meticulously mapping and manipulating these fields. These fields are simply the expression of electrical gradients and currents that exist within and around living tissues. Think of the magnetic field around a magnet or the gravitational field around the Earth. They are real physical phenomena.
Okay. So what makes up this field in, say, the brain?
In the brain, it manifests as the flow of ions across cell membranes, the synchronized electrical activity we record as brain waves, EEG signals, and the overall voltage gradients present throughout the neural tissue. It's organized electrical activity, and as we've been discussing, light plays a crucial role in initiating and structuring that organization.
So with trillions of cells in my body, how do they coordinate all this electrical activity within this field? It sounds like chaos waiting to happen.
It would be chaos without organization. But they function as an incredibly intricate, interconnected network. Cells communicate directly through gap junctions.
Little tunnels between cells.
Basically, yes, allowing for the rapid exchange of electrical signals and small molecules. They also respond collectively to changes in the overall bioelectric field. Think of it like a complex orchestra. Each instrument plays its part, but they are all synchronized by the conductor. In this case, the bioelectric field acts as a unifying conductor, coordinating the activity of countless cells working together as circuits and resonant structures.
Wow.
And this coordinated dance of light-induced changes, biophoton emissions, charge flow, and evolving geometry is what gives rise to all our biological functions, including our thoughts, memories, and emotions.
Okay, so if I were trying to explain this to someone who still thought it sounded a bit out there, like the TLDR version.
The TLDR is something like this. You are not just a collection of inert biological parts. You are a dynamic, resonating field of highly organized geometry and bioelectric activity, constantly being shaped by your experiences, including light. Light, at its most fundamental, initiates change within this system. Your physical body stores these changes in its structure. The bioelectric field acts as the communication network, coordinating all of this activity. And memory, in this light, is simply the ongoing persistence of that coordinated activity, that stable pattern within the field. It's not magic. It's fundamental biophysics.
This is definitely challenging my initial assumptions. Okay, so if this is the underlying reality, does it mean we can actually do something with this knowledge? Can we prove it, test it, and maybe even use it to help the body heal itself, address that prove-it feeling?
Absolutely. This isn't just a philosophical idea. It's a framework with profound implications for how we understand and interact with biological systems. It suggests that we can potentially influence processes like healing and regeneration by working with these fundamental principles of light, bioelectricity, and geometry.
How so?
Well, think about how understanding electromagnetism led to technologies like MRI and targeted stimulation therapies. This paradigm opens the door to entirely new ways of approaching challenges like nerve damage, chronic pain, and tissue repair. The research in this area is actively exploring ways to test and apply these concepts, looking at neuroregeneration, joint and spine healing, for example.
Interesting. You mentioned cell memory earlier. How does a single cell, which isn't a brain, have memory in this context? It sounds like a stretch.
Yeah, cell memory here doesn't imply a conscious recollection like we experience. It's not like your liver cell is remembering its birthday.
Right.
Instead, it refers to a cell's inherent ability to remember its fundamental identity, what type of cell it is, where it belongs in the body, and its correct shape and function. Similarly, tissues have a form of collective memory that allows them to regenerate and repair correctly.
The flatworm example you mentioned.
Exactly. The remarkable regeneration of flatworms, where a tiny fragment can regrow the entire organism, including the brain, strongly suggests that this memory of the whole form isn't solely contained within individual cells, but is also encoded within the overall bioelectric field of the organism. So, cellular memory is essentially the pattern of its correct geometry and the corresponding bioelectric field configuration.
If cells have this inherent memory of how to be, why doesn't our body always heal perfectly? Why do we get scars, chronic injuries, things that don't quite go back to normal?
That's a great question. Think back to our orchestra analogy. When the conductor, the bioelectric field is clear and strong, and the sheet music, the underlying geometry is intact, the cells, musicians, will generally play in harmony, leading to proper growth and repair. However, if the field is disrupted by injury or illness, or if the geometric template is distorted, like with scar tissue, then the cells can lose their way, leading to incomplete healing or dysfunction. The original memory, the correct pattern, might be obscured, noisy, or even overwritten. True healing in this view isn't just about forcing cells to regenerate, it's about restoring that original coherent pattern, reminding them of the music.
And how do we practically go about restoring that memory? It sounds like a very subtle level of intervention.
It involves essentially repatterning and reminding the body of its inherent blueprint. This can be achieved through various means. One powerful approach is using structured, resonant photonic input specific wavelengths and patterns of light designed to interact with biological tissues at a fundamental level.
Like light therapy, photobiomodulation.
Exactly, but potentially much more sophisticated. For example, coherent near-infrared light has been shown to reduce inflammation, stimulate cellular repair, and even promote nerve regeneration. People are exploring the use of light arrays based on sacred geometry principles or pulsing light that mirrors natural biological rhythms for their potential to restore coherence.
So light is a key tool. What other ways can we influence this system?
Another critical avenue is working directly with the bioelectric field. Technologies are being developed to map the electrical voltages within tissues and then apply targeted electrical stimulation to help restore balance and correct distorted patterns.
Like electroceuticals.
Precisely. This builds directly on Michael Levin's work, exploring ways to use electrical signals to guide tissue regeneration and even influence cell fate. The idea is to provide the correct electrical instructions to guide the healing process.
And what about these memory and training protocols you mentioned earlier? What does that involve?
These involve using a combination of subtle energetic inputs to nudge the body back towards its optimal state. This could include delivering very low-intensity microcurrents along specific pathways in the body, potentially mirroring the electrical patterns present during healthy development, like along acupuncture meridians, perhaps.
Okay.
Magnetic fields, especially those generated by coils designed with specific geometric ratios, like the golden ratio, can also influence tissue resonance and promote healing therapy EMF, but maybe more targeted geometrically.
And movement, sound.
Yes. Even specific movement practices and breathing techniques can help to activate and harmonize the geometric flow within the body. And sound frequencies, particularly those that create binaural beats or harmonic resonances, can help to entrain and stabilize the body's vibrational structure. The overall aim is a gentle retuning of the body's underlying geometry and electrical activity.
So these methods aren't just adding raw energy to the system, they're providing information.
Precisely. They're not just about boosting cellular activity in a general way, like charging a battery. They're about unlocking the body's own inherent memory of how to function correctly, restoring the original electrical score so that cells can play their parts in harmony.
Makes sense.
Healing, from this perspective, is a return to a state of natural order, a potentially effortless process because the underlying geometry naturally tends towards coherence. We're essentially reminding the body of its innate wisdom, not forcing a biological process against its will.
You mentioned earlier that every cell is like a tiny battery. How significant is this electrical potential at a cellular level?
It's absolutely fundamental. Every living cell maintains an electrical voltage difference across its membrane, the membrane potential. This is created by the controlled movement of charged ions through specialized channels in the cell membrane.
Like a dam holding back water, but with ions.
Kind of, yeah. Think of it as a miniature capacitor, storing energy and information. In neurons, this resting potential of around -70 millivolts is crucial for their ability to fire signals. But this isn't just a property of nerve cells. Every single cell in your body has this electrical potential.
Every cell. Wow.
Yep. And collectively, these tiny batteries create complex electrical patterns throughout your tissues, acting like a living dynamic circuit board.
And how do these individual cellular batteries communicate and coordinate their activity? We talked about the field.
Right. They communicate directly through those gap junctions we mentioned, which form physical connections between adjacent cells, allowing for the rapid passage of ions and electrical signals. This direct electrical coupling allows for incredibly fast and coordinated activity across tissues.
So they're literally wired together in a sense.
In a very real sense. Furthermore, cells respond to the overall bioelectric field that they collectively create. It's not just individual cells acting in isolation. They are constantly influencing and being influenced by the electrical environment around them. Think back to the orchestra. It's not just individual instruments playing. They're all listening and responding to the overall harmony and rhythm established by the conductor, the field.
This really highlights the importance of Michael Levin's work again in demonstrating the power of these bioelectric fields. It sounds like he showed this isn't just a side effect.
Absolutely. Levin's research has provided compelling evidence that these bioelectric fields are not just a byproduct of cellular activity. They are active drivers of biological processes. His experiments showing the regeneration of limbs in frogs where they normally wouldn't, or changing where a head grows on a flatworm.
Yeah, the two-headed flatworm thing is wild.
It is, and he did it simply by manipulating the electrical environment around cells. This demonstrates the profound influence of these fields on development and repair, often independent of or overriding genetic instructions. It strongly suggests that cells possess a kind of memory of form, and that bioelectricity is the key to accessing and directing that memory.
So this memory of the correct shape and function isn't just stored in DNA or the brain then, it's distributed.
Exactly. The memory of optimal shape and function appears to be distributed throughout all tissues of the body, encoded within the dynamic patterns of electrical voltage gradients, the geometric arrangements of electrical charge. So, to reiterate, memory in this context is a harmonious interplay of physical structure, the continuous flow of energy and information, and the specific distribution of electrical charge throughout the organism, what we call bioelectric geometry.
And healing, in this light, is about restoring that original bioelectric geometry. The example of regrowing the flatworm tail by restoring the electric field years later is incredible proof of concept.
It beautifully illustrates the principle. When tissue is injured, healthy cells attempt to reestablish the original voltage patterns. However, if the overall bioelectric field is disrupted or weakened, maybe due to chronic inflammation or scar tissue, this regenerative process can falter. Levin's experiment showed the persistence of this memory within the bioelectric field, accessible long after the initial injury.
So, to guide biology towards healing and regeneration, we can use light to activate cellular processes, ions to reshape the bioelectric field, sound and magnetism to influence structure, and this concept of energy coherence to restore the overall geometric order. Is that a fair summary?
Precisely. These are all tools that work by interacting with the fundamental principles governing biological organization. By understanding how light, ions, sound, and magnetism influence the bioelectric field and the underlying geometry of our tissues, we can potentially guide the body's innate healing capacities in more targeted and effective ways, ultimately restoring coherence to the system.
This brings us back to the fundamental question. What is light in this context, if it's more than just photons we can see? Because we've used it in a very broad sense.
That's a crucial distinction to keep making. While photons are the fundamental particles of electromagnetic radiation that we typically think of as light.
Like from the sun or a lamp.
Right. But light, in this broader sense, represents a fundamental principle of organization. It signifies coherence, information, the inherent ordering power of geometry, and the phenomenon of resonance. It's the underlying blueprint that guides the emergence of form, even in the absence of visible photons.
How so? Like a plant growing in the dark.
Exactly. Think of a seed sprouting in the dark, forming intricate structures guided by an inherent geometric program. or our internal experience of memory and imagination, that inner seeing of light or images, which also originates from these internal patterns, not from external illumination. The principle of order is still at play.
So shining external light, like in photobiomodulation, is a way to tap into this inherent potential for order, to remind the system.
Exactly. Photobiomodulation works by activating light-sensitive molecules within our cells, essentially jump-starting processes that can help restore coherence and unlock the inherent potential for self-repair that already exists within the system. It's like giving the system a nudge back towards its optimal pattern.
Okay, so to clarify this definition of light one last time for everyone, it encompasses photons, yes, the broader electromagnetic spectrum, but also this deeper information coherence field, the underlying structural principles of symmetry, resonance, and relationship that give light its organizing power.
Precisely. In this context, we can truly say light is the language of form. It's the fundamental principle that dictates how matter organizes itself in living systems.
So the focus shifts from just adding light energy to restoring the pattern that light creates or represents.
Exactly. Healing, memory, regeneration, they seem to be about restoring the geometry of coherence that organizes everything. Light, in this sense, is a principle of order in being, not limited to illumination.
And bioelectricity, then, is the expression of this light-ordered geometry in the body.
Yes. You could call bioelectricity the living light inside. It's the dynamic medium through which this geometric order manifests and operates. Cells are electrical machines, forming a bioelectric network that orchestrates growth, memory, regeneration, and cell identity. And as Levin showed, changing those electrical patterns can literally redefine a cell's destiny.
Which leads back to the question of what powers and organizes this bioelectricity in the first place, if it's not just random noise.
Yeah, and the answer within this paradigm lies in the intricate interplay of geometry and this fundamental principle we're calling light. The bioelectric field doesn't just arise randomly. It follows specific geometric patterns, harmonic structures that reflect this underlying order. Bioelectricity essentially carries the signature of this organizing principle, even in the absence of external light.
Which explains how cells know where to go in the dark during development.
It provides a potential explanation, yes. Think of how cells in a developing embryo organize themselves, or how a damaged tissue attempts to rebuild its original form. These processes seem to be guided by electrical fields that, remember, the correct spatial arrangement. This is cellular memory in action, driven by bioelectric geometry.
So when healing goes awry, the bioelectric field gets scrambled, like static on a radio.
That's a good analogy. Injury or illness can disrupt the coherent patterns within the bioelectric field, leading to cells forgetting their proper structure and function, resulting in chaotic geometry. Healing, then, is the process of reintroducing that coherent pattern, tuning the radio back to the clear station.
Through things like electroceuticals, light therapy, magnetic fields.
Exactly. Interventions like electroceuticals, light therapy designed to restore coherence, and magnetic fields PMF to restore resonance come into play. The future of therapeutics may lie in combining these approaches with therapies based on structure geometry and resonance to facilitate this retuning process.
So communication between cells isn't just chemical, it's fundamentally through these electrical, magnetic, and vibrational fields.
Absolutely. Cells are constantly exchanging information through these energetic fields. Memories are patterns within these fields. Healing is essentially a process of repatterning these fields, and bioelectricity is the fundamental medium that connects it all.
So the cutting edge of healing and optimization might involve reactivating this inherent memory through geometry and this bioelectric light. That sounds futuristic, but also logical within this framework.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Imagine custom-designed frequency patterns tuned to the specific geometry of an organ, or light delivered in structured resonance patterns that mimic natural biological rhythms. Think of advanced bioelectric field mapping and targeted correction therapies for conditions ranging from neurological disorders to tissue damage.
Guiding cell.
Even guiding cell-to-cell communication using precise electrical signaling. And we shouldn't overlook the potential of training meditative states to enhance our own internal light visualization, strengthening those intrinsic patterns. It all points towards a future where we can achieve profound levels of healing and regeneration by working with the body's inherent geometric and bioelectric intelligence.
You ended before with that powerful analogy. You are a field of memory. Light wrote the music. Electricity plays the song. Geometry is the score. Healing is remembering the melody. It really does bring it all together poetically.
It highlights the interconnectedness of these fundamental principles and the potential for profound healing when we understand and work with them, not just against symptoms.
Okay, even after all this incredible explanation, I can still imagine some listeners feeling a bit overwhelmed or thinking, okay, but how does this actually work in a way I can grasp? It still feels big.
That's a perfectly natural feeling. This is a shift in perspective, moving from a purely chemical or mechanical view to include energetics and geometry.
Right.
It takes time. So let's just reiterate a foundational point, make it super concrete. Your body is electric.
Right.
Every single cell has a measurable electrical voltage across its membrane. This isn't metaphor. It's fundamental biology you can measure with instruments. Fact.
Okay, start there. Cells have voltage.
Exactly. And when you consider the combined electrical activity of all those trillions of cells, they create the bioelectric field. This field isn't just a random jumble of electricity. It functions as a sophisticated map and a complex language that cells use to communicate and coordinate their activities.
A map and a language, guiding things.
Absolutely. Bioelectric gradients carry crucial instructions for embryonic development, tissue regeneration, and even the maintenance of cell identity. Michael Levin's groundbreaking work has repeatedly demonstrated that by manipulating these electrical fields, you can directly influence these fundamental biological processes, even overriding genetic predispositions in some cases. It guides biology.
So, light and geometry are fundamentally linked to this electrical activity that governs so much of life. It's all interconnected.
Precisely. Think of light in its broadest sense as the principle of order and coherence, creating specific geometric arrangements within the body. The bioelectric field is essentially the dynamic, living expression of this light-ordered geometry in biological systems.
And coherence is key.
Coherence is key. When this field is coherent, when it exhibits harmonious, ordered patterns, life thrives. When it becomes distorted or chaotic, that's when we see dysfunction and disease.
It still feels like there's a bridge we need to cross sometimes between the observable physical world, the flesh and blood, and this deeper energetic framework. How do we bridge that gap mentally?
You're right, it requires a shift. Our everyday experience is primarily of the physical body. But what this paradigm suggests is that this visible, tangible form is the outward manifestation of a deeper, more fundamental energetic and geometric scaffolding. It's like seeing the building, but not the underlying blueprint and structural supports.
And light is the architect.
Light, in this context, represents the underlying organizing force, the intelligence of resonance, coherence, and structure that orchestrates it all, the blueprint and the ongoing instruction set.
So, to really summarize this whole deep dive, especially for those who started out thinking this sounds like bullshit.
Yeah. The core takeaway is this. Light, understood not just as brightness but as a fundamental principle of organization and coherence, manifests through specific geometric arrangements in matter. These arrangements then express themselves in living systems as dynamic bioelectric fields. This interconnected triad light, geometry, bioelectricity plays a fundamental role in memory at all levels, in shaping the form and function of our bodies, and crucially, in the intricate processes of healing and regeneration.
So, what might have initially felt like a far-fetched WTF idea
Is actually a complex but increasingly well-supported scientific framework with profound implications for how we understand biology and approach health. It suggests that by working with the body's inherent energetic and geometric intelligence, rather than just treating symptoms chemically or surgically, we can unlock new potentials for healing and well-being. It offers a different way to prove things work by observing pattern restoration.
That's a powerful perspective. It certainly gives me, and hopefully our listeners, a lot to think about in terms of our own bodies, our health, memory, maybe even intuition. Are we beings of structured light and electrical resonance?
That's the provocative thought, isn't it? It encourages us to reconsider our understanding of ourselves as dynamic, interconnected fields of energy and information, constantly interacting with the organizing principles of the universe.
Well, this has certainly been a deep dive, shining a new kind of light, maybe literally, on some fundamental aspects of life. Thanks for guiding us through this complex territory.
My pleasure. It's fascinating stuff, and the exploration, both scientifically and personally, really continues. There's still so much to learn.